And I say hi, everyone, again, and hi for you who watched the recording. And yeah, fantastic to see so many of you dropping in. Fantastic to see your group presentations already from the first week. Thanks for this, and thanks for sharing and commenting on it in the community space. Really nice. Keep on the good job. Today, we're going to talk more about online participation and digital literacies. And it's my pleasure to again have David with us. So hi, David.
Hello.
I'll hand over the floor to you shortly. I'll do a quick introduction if that's okay.
Sure.
Yes, great. You might hopefully you have seen the video of the visitor in residence, a video which we learned on Twitter. It's recorded from 2013, I guess.
I think it's 2013, 2014. Yeah, it's pretty ancient now. So It's becoming a bit like the reverse of a picture of Dorian Gray for me. Who is that young man in the video?
But we still feel, I think and hope you all agree that it's still a very, very relevant model to have juxtaposing maybe the digital natives myth, and we will talk more about this. But Dave is not only behind this model of visitors residence, he's also the head of digital education and academic practice at the University of Arts London, the largest digital arts university in Europe.
It's the largest creative arts higher education institution in Europe and possibly in the world, but we just don't know how to measure that. It's big. It's like it's around about 25,000 students all doing creative arts and design. Yeah. So it's big for that kind of subject area.
Awesome. And not only that, but you're also, and this is pretty awesome, I think, the president of UK's Association of Learning Technology, ALT. It's one of the, I think, the leading international bodies for digital learning, discussions, thoughts, and leading the way in how we practice and think about digital education. And fantastic network. Check it out if you don't know it. Yeah. Thanks for being with us again, Dave. And I'll leave over the floor to you.
Okay. So what I'll do is I'll share my screen, a little shuffle. Now in theory, that's all good. Does that look good to you guys?
Yes.
Brilliant. Okay. Right. So we've got a little less than an hour, and I think this is your first kind of full-on session, isn't it? Is that right? So I think hopefully this will help kind of lay some things out, create a bit of a framework for the rest of the ONL. And what we're going to do is we're going to sort of explore our own digital participation and our own forms of engagement, and then maybe reflect on that a little bit more broadly. So the key thing here, I mean, if you've watched the video, then you'll know, but the key thing here is I'm going to ask you to draw your own visitor and residence map at some point in the next hour. So if you've got pen and paper, or if you prefer doing it digitally, then either way, but you might want to grab some stuff, but be ready for that. That's coming up. Okay, so it's not just a one-way street here. So I really like this quote from Kevin Kelly. So Kevin Kelly, I think, was one of the founding people of Wired magazine back in the day, and is one of the few futurists that I really rate. If you go back to the late 90s and look at some of the stuff that Kevin Kelly we're talking about, a lot of it's happened. But I think this is a really useful quote, because the reason that we're talking the way we are today, and the reason that there's been such a massive shift just over perhaps one generation in the way that we learn, the way that we socialize, the way that politics happens, just the way society functions, is because of this, is that everything's connected to everything else all the time. And if you've got a smartphone in your pocket like I have right now, then you're sort of connected to everything everywhere. And that's just on, that connection is just on the whole time. So we're part of this massive network. And the reason why that's important is because there's a two-way flow there. So obviously, historically, knowledge would have been more of a kind of one-way street, in that there were very particular producers of knowledge and very particular consumers, and it was quite difficult to move from being a consumer to a producer. Now anyone can publish, okay? So if really simple example is Wikipedia. Wikipedia only exists because everyone can publish. So this has this massive effect on the way the world works. But what's interesting is that whilst it's incredibly important, and the digital environment kind of is through and around everything we do these days, we struggle to visualize it. So each of us has a different sort of conception of the digital space, because it is a virtual space. It's sort of an imagined space, if you like, but we've all got our own map of it in our mind. And again, this is from Kevin Kelly, where he did this internet mapping project, where he just said, draw a map of the internet as you see it and indicate your home. And there's some great examples. I mean, this is from a little while ago, but there's some great examples of how different the response is to that simple question. Oh, and what I should say is, if you've got any questions as we go through, or you want to make a comment or anything like that, then I do welcome you to sort of use the chat. Hello, smaller person. So it's this map here is, so I'll keep an eye on the chat as we go through if you want any clarifications or anything like that. This map here, I see as a kind of physical infrastructure, sort of computers and wires response to the internet. This is how this person's imagining the internet. This one, closer to how I think of it, is a bit swirly and a bit all over the place, but it has these little boxes on it that might be, I don't know, places they regularly go to, apps they regularly use. There's a little red box down in the bottom left-hand corner, which might be their home. Okay, but again, it's different. This one I like. I see this as the kind of, I don't know, maybe it's an enormous amount of information being kind of piped through their laptop and then it gets blasted out the other side. I don't know, but that's different again. And then lastly, just of these examples, you can look this up. There are quite a few of them. This is it's just people. Okay, so this is a good example of where the technology has been sort of disintermediated. This is to this person, the internet is the people that they are connected to because of the internet, if you like. It's not the technology, it's not the functionality. This person seems pretty happy with the internet. Everybody's happy. I'm not sure if they drew it now, whether that would be the case, but it's like a constellation of people, right? So it's become the people, not the technology. And if you compare this one with this one, these are pretty different, right? So we're all floating around with different conceptions of the digital environment in our minds, but we don't often sort of reveal those conceptions, or even perhaps reflect on the fact that they're assumptions. And what that means is that when it comes to teaching and learning and students, we might be working with different assumptions or different ideas of what the digital environment is, what it's useful for, what it looks like, how to navigate it. And I'm sure we've all had plenty of experiences over COVID and lockdowns where our students or we have sort of got lost. We don't know where the course is or which bit's happening where or whatever it might. And it's because we don't have a shared map, right? Obviously, the physical environment we create a lot of maps. Although having said that, it's very common for students and for us to get lost in institutional buildings as well, because they don't have a good map. So it says, you know, we're going to do this session in room G04, and it's impossible to find, right? So I like the idea that, you know, that's kind of behind this how do we create a map of what we are achieving in the digital environment, or what we hope from it. Now, just to put a little bit of kind of, I guess, pedagogy or educational theory behind this. I like this diagram because it's not a Bloom's taxonomy, really. It's a little bit, it's different to that, but I found this diagram really useful, which is that somewhere at the bottom there's access. I guess it's a form of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but in educational form. So at the bottom there's access and awareness, i.e. if you can't open a laptop and you don't know how to type, you're not going to be getting very far with digital learning, right? And then it goes up to skills and practices and identity. Now, a lot of what I'm focused on and a lot of what I talk about is at the top of this triangle in around practices and identity. But that doesn't mean that obviously access and awareness and skills aren't fundamental to everything we're doing. I think what's important to note, they have put arrows around this. I think what's important to note with this, with Bloom's, with a lot of these kind of triangle or ladder type frameworks, is that you don't really learn everything about access and awareness and then everything about skills and everything about practices and everything about identity. The reality for any individual is you're bouncing up and down this all the time in lots and lots of little iterative cycles. So I think we have to be wary of the kind of stacking concept of digital literacies. But for me, you can't go wrong if you use identity as a lens in terms of how students respond to things and how we go about learning stuff. So just before we get in, I mean, I guess if you've seen the video, then you'll have heard me speak about this. But I think just somebody's written, maybe there's a lot of modern concepts in the digital era that we need to discuss this way. What is online learning? What is network? Yeah, I think so. I guess we haven't really developed a vocabulary or a way of talking about these things. We've all found over COVID, I think, that you can say blended learning, but nobody knows what that is and everybody thinks of it's different. Having said that, I think a lot of traditional learning, a lot of the really important concepts are tacit, like what's a lecture? What's the point of a seminar? I think a lot of what we do in education remains tacit and we don't actually really describe it or explain it. It's just been around for long enough that it's kind of become part of the fabric of culture, but not for everyone. So if you're first in your family to go to university, then you discover that none of these things are really described and you just have to experience them and work them out for yourself, which can be quite a hard process. So yeah. Yeah, the pyramid is a bit odd because they're equally important. So then you just have to have a circle and then it's like Kolb's thing or whatever. A diagram's a metaphor and metaphors are necessarily limited. So I'm not too picky about it. But I think what's important is to not get too stuck on the idea that they're linear, those kind of diagrams. Anyway, digital natives. I love this piece of artwork from one of our students, where they basically said, what should clothing look like given that we use our smartphones all the time? And this was her answer, which is pretty good, I think, because my shoulder hurts. Anyway, so I'm just going to ask you to respond in the chat now, if you can, to the question, what do we think we mean by digital native? What do we think that's come to mean? Whether you agree with the idea or not, what do we think that means? Okay, yeah. I'll just give it a couple of minutes. Oh, you see, this is the thing. This is going to travel a bit quickly. I'm going to extend my...
Be scrolling.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so I think a common one coming in is the idea of growing up with digital. Yeah, the language one, I think, Helen, is important. I think it is a metaphor of language. Yeah, Yeah. Yeah. So Petra, that I think that's an assumption can participate in digital social systems. I think that's in the that's what's implied by the digital native idea. Yeah, okay. It's interesting. It's quite a range of views here, as you can see, because it's one of the reasons it's a popular idea, or has been a popular idea, is because it's open to interpretation. So I think people tend to use it at their convenience. I mean, I think for me, I mean, it was a useful kind of early idea because it's from over 20 years ago now. And some of the idea was around this kind of unsubstantiated concept that somehow young people were playing a lot of digital games and that would rewire their brain. That every couple of years there's this, oh, the digital environment's rewiring the brains of our kids, right? But if you look back, there's always something, you know. It used to be, when I was a kid, it was MTV. Oh, MTV's rewiring our kids' brains, you know what I mean? So it's just like a generational fear. But I think the dangerous aspect of the digital native idea was it confuses kind of technical competency with capabilities around literacies. So in very simple terms, I guess, you know, I'd say, you know, knowing the ins and outs of your smartphone at one level doesn't make you a good researcher, right? But actually, for quite a few years, higher education, certainly in the UK, was sort of operating on that assumption. It was like, well, the kids know how to use the tech, so they kind of must know everything that you can do with the tech in terms of actual practices. Whereas most people, you know, they spend most of their time on 2 or 3 apps on their phone. So one way of looking at it, which a colleague of mine said a while ago, I think it was Tabitha Newman, said, we confuse ownership with capability. So, you know, we see that all our students own a lot of technology, and so we imagine that they're good with that technology. Well, they're probably good with certain aspects of it, but it doesn't mean that they've got all the literacies that we'd hope that they'd have. Television did change people's brain activity. Yeah, possibly. Well, yes, if there's research, then it did. I can go with that. I'm an academic, but and I'm not saying that the digital environment hasn't rewired everybody's brains, but the point is, it's kind of rewiring everybody's brains. It's not just young people, right? And it's also worth considering that the original digital natives are probably about 40 now. So I think the thing to do, I don't think it's necessarily fundamentally terrible idea as long as you keep it under control. The dangerous part of it is the generational aspect of it. Okay, and that's where I came on with the visitor and resident stuff. So what I'm going to do, so this is when I had an onstage debate with Mark Prinsky, who came up with digital natives, and I just found it very frustrating. If you dig around in my blog, then you'll see that, but you can see I look quite annoyed in that picture. So what I'm going to do is just very quickly lay out the visitor and residence mapping process, and then we're going to do it, and then we're going to talk about some of these ideas that I've laid out here through your own maps. Now, if you've watched the video, you already roughly know what's going on here, so I'm going to do this very quickly, just to say that it is a process that's used all over the world now, actually. And there's a study that came out just very recently that I'm going to refer to later on, which is quite an interesting use of visitor and residence, actually. So you can use it yourself in, you know, with your students or with colleagues. So as mentioned in the video, there's a continuum. The key thing, I can't remember because I haven't watched it, because I don't dare watch it, is that video. I haven't watched that for years. I can't remember whether I talk about the fact that it's a sliding scale. We're not trying to type people. You're not either a visitor or a resident. It's about modes of engagement. So everybody will sometimes be engaging in visitor mode, sometimes in resident mode. I think, let me check. If I just explain each end briefly. So when you're in visitor mode, the easiest way I've found of explaining it is it's a bit like you're thinking of the web as a series of tools that do specific jobs, and you're going online, finding that tool, using it, and then sort of coming away from it. So it's quite instrumental, and you don't leave a social trace. You do leave a data trace, and in recent years, people are much more sensitive to that now. But there's a difference between a trace that you leave on the surface of the web that others can see and a data trace that is sort of behind closed doors that only the people running those platforms and sharing all of that stuff for advertising, all the rest of it, can see. But I'm glad to say that we've got a little bit better at knowing that that's going on. And then in resident mode, we see the web as a series of spaces or places. I really like the idea of place, and certainly over COVID, that became a really useful idea. Is how do we take advantage of the digital as a set of places rather than as a set of tools, because we really needed to connect to each other. And I made an argument that environments like Zoom aren't quite as much of a place as we imagine they are. We just think they're a place because we can see each other's faces in it. Okay, but that's kind of a slightly different, that's a slight aside. The important thing with resident mode is your motivation to engage is to connect with other people, either sort of synchronously live or asynchronously. And you will be leaving a social trace. You're going to be leaving things behind online that are connected with an identity. Now, it doesn't have to be, you know, it could be an alternative identity. It could be your professional identity. It could be your personal identity, but it's an identity. It's something to do with you or an expression of you. Okay. And clearly there's a massive difference between those two modes. Apologies if you watch the video and this is just me repeating stuff. It's worth saying that activity in the middle, because it's a sliding scale, there's a lot goes on online that is within what I call closed groups or communities. So it's resident in nature, it's people connecting with each other, but it's not completely open and online. Like I'd say most of an awful lot of what happens on social media, if not the majority of what happens on social media, is both social, but within a known group, like a WhatsApp group, like a group on the VLE, if you like what we're doing now. You know, we might not know each other personally in this Zoom room, but we're all here for a shared reason. There's a kind of connection between us in terms of our motivations to be here. Okay, so then what we do is we added a vertical axis for context, because context and motivation, context in and around motivation becomes very important. Personal and institutional seem to work quite well. For students, it's quite often personal and course, the course of study they're on, because they don't tend to think institutionally necessarily. For some people, it's personal and professional. It sort of doesn't matter. It's just personal and the other stuff that you do. Quite often, it's the things I make money from and the things I don't make money from. It depends. It's up to you to interpret that. This is my map. Now, somebody in Twitter, let me have a look. They asked me, it was Benedict. He said, I don't know if you're in the room, Benedict, but you said, I wonder how much your map's changed since you made the video. Well, it's changed a lot. I just haven't updated my map. Hello, Benedict. So this is I look at this and I'm seeing myself from like 8 years ago. So it's quite weird. I need to update it. Some of the things are still the same, but obviously your map changes over time. And I have known research projects and courses that have kind of done a map at the start of the course and a map at the end. And then you can lay them over each other and see what's shifted and what's moved, which I think is quite a useful way of sort of tracking the fact that digital capabilities are in constant development, if you like. So I'll confuse myself by looking at Twitter. It's incredibly distracting. Social media is distracting, by the way. So just to give you an idea of how I did I'll just go through some of these boxes. The reason Twitter is on the right there is because that's where you're most likely to find me. I'm actually less active in Twitter than I used to be. But if you want to know where I live online, then I'm in Twitter. to the extent that my previous team used to DM me in Twitter instead of email me because they knew I was paying more attention to that than to email. Do you see what I mean? So it was where I was living online. I blog infrequently, but it's always about work. So that's institutional, but it's quite resident because it's very much my opinions, and I will respond to comments and to people talking about it. Although people tend to talk about my blog posts in Twitter more than they talk about blog posts in comments on the blog, which I think is the way the world's gone there. Just going to the other side, personal email, top left, visitor and personal. It's very visitor because I'm not chatty in email, for example. But some people are really resonant in email, right? So the location of a particular technology is to do with your practices and your form of engagement in that technology rather than the technology itself. And I've got Facebook up there, which has shifted slightly because I'm a member of a sports club, which means I'm a little bit, I pay more attention to Facebook because that's where they chat. But it used to be just like a terrible address book. Like, you know what I mean? I just wasn't interested in pictures of other people's children and, you know, that whole business, just not for me. So it was just where I just went, oh, I've completely forgotten what that person's email address is. I'll just contact them in Facebook. It was that kind of level. And a few other things there, right? Some things end up in the middle because they're just messy. So Google Apps, Google Docs, YouTube, it's just a bit of everything. What about WhatsApp? Well, this is why this one's so old. You're right. I'm promising myself to update this, but I'd say WhatsApp. Oh yeah, that's a good one, Helen, actually. WhatsApp is dangerously in the middle of my map because it contains a lot of personal family chat, especially now my kids are at university, but also my boss is in there and will randomly WhatsApp me at weird times of the day. So it's this horrible combination of the personal and the professional, and I'm quite resident in it because I respond quite quickly. So again, sometimes the map's useful just as a way of kind of figuring out how to manage your own engagement as much as to know what it is. So anyway, that's my map. Your map will look different. The thing to do now is to grab a piece of paper and a pen and draw your map or draw it digitally. And then, and the easiest way to do this is to use a phone. Go to this link, and I think you can put the link in the chat, or QR code your way to the Padlet. And when you've done your map, take a photograph of it and chuck it into the Padlet. Now, if anybody's got any questions about that process, then just drop the question into chat or get on the microphone. But other than that, I'm going to give you sort of 5 to 10 minutes to have a go at your maps. But I'm here if you want any clarification. Nobody gets their map. Nobody gets everything onto their map the first time, and the process is messy. So it's best just to sort of scroll it down, write it down nice and quickly, and don't overthink it. It's like the arts approach. And when you're roughly happy with it, chuck it into the Padlet, and then we'll have a bit of a chat about some of them. I hope everybody's okay with that.
Sounds good.
Great. I'm gonna go to the link then. Leave that there for
that. Dave, I don't have the app on my phone. Is there another way to do it?
Yeah, if you got the Padlet app, definitely, yeah.
I have to download the app in my phone.
You don't need an app to contribute to the Padlet. It's just like a web page.
Well, it's asking to log in with the university credentials.
Is it?
Yeah, it sends me to log in Karlstads Universität, and then it's
really?
like, yeah.
Oh, sorry.
I don't know if anyone else
the
has the same
settings while you
problem.
draw. I changed the settings while you draw your map. Sorry
How
about
can I
that.
draw it? I can't use anything. It just keeps asking. Well, anyway, I'll just wait for you to update the link.
Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't have that problem, but I don't know why not.
We consider you part of the university, maybe.
It could at some point when we've been working together, perhaps something happened in that area. Now, I suspect Ben did that before, or works at about 1 million miles an hour. And can I employ you in my team to make online courses if you do really work that fast?
So I'm a little bit confused. The setting says whoever has the link can add, and I'm not sure. I don't think Ben is at Karlstad University. So I'm
I'm
Okay.
not, but I'm not, but I was able to just click on it. It seemed fine.
yeah, thank you.
I wonder what's happening
Which
there.
makes helping the others a little bit more trickier, but
Maybe it has to do that I'm using my university account, so I don't know, it's not allowing it for a Finnish IP or something. Because I can see Ben's map as well, but it's keep asking me to register or to log in with my institutional address.
okay,
Yeah,
could
me
you
too.
open?
Also with the phone, so
Okay, that was over the phone.
no, with both the computer and the phone, but I'm still trying to find a way. I mean, I'm just signing and see what happens, like
Yeah.
create an account or whatever, let's see.
Yeah, I can't do it because it asked me to log into Karlstad University.
Oh, this is fun. This is a new one. This is a new confusing one. I wonder if universities that have an institutional account with Padlet, I wonder if it confuses it massively.
Yeah, I'm really sorry about this. Thank you for testing it. Test the waste PC. No. We have one map on there, and the others are probably still drawing. And
Paula, the easiest way to create a map is just to draw it and then take a photograph of it. Yeah, that's weird. It shouldn't ask you to, you shouldn't even get to that login page, really.
no.
Yeah, it might work incognito. This is a fun sort of collective. This is the fun thing about the digital environment. It's constantly changing, isn't it? And so the thing that worked last time quite often acts differently.
Yeah, and it's our systems seem to behave strangely today. We have also apparently, although the setting says it's you can chat to everyone in the webinar, apparently you can only chat to the two of us. To
Okay.
you, Dave, and me individually. So both Zoom and Padlet behaving strangely. Really sorry about the inconvenience.
I mean, for those, I mean, hopefully enough people will be able to post a map because we, you know, and then we can have a discussion about them. We don't need, not everybody needs to post a map for the session to be okay. And obviously the advantage of this is that the Padlet's still there. So if you finish your map later or you find a way in later, then it's still useful because you can refer back and have a look around. One of the nice things about the process is looking at other people's maps and seeing the ways in which they're different from your map. I guess, I think perhaps to a certain extent, we imagine that we all have, we'd probably work on the assumption that we all have fairly similar maps when quite often they're radically different. But there's plenty coming in now, so that's great. So it's not fundamentally locked out, this Padlet. So clearly it's just a weird, I'd lay money on people struggling also having a university account, maybe.
Sounds like a
So we'll
Good
just-
theory or working
It's a
hypothesis.
theory. I'm good at coming up with a quick theory with no.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah, the
can't
funny thing is
substantiate.
that once I set up to start, like, create my own account, suddenly it's like, oh, now you can edit. It's like, great, thank you, I guess.
It's
So-
Padlet just being aggressive. It's just aggressively trying to get people's data, even though theoretically you shouldn't have to put it in.
I refuse to give them my data to any form or collect them. So I opt out of absolutely
Yeah,
everything.
yeah.
Yeah.
Good for you.
But then I can't work with these tools.
Yeah. Yeah, that was it, Benedict. That's why we're doing it. It's just an example, like a live example. Although, let's be honest. Okay, let's use that idea. I'm very confident that that if there were a whole load of teenagers in this room, they wouldn't be any better at using Padlet than us. They'd have all the same problems and be just as confused, if not more confused. And one of the funniest things, I did this at a conference once, where I started saying, the thing about people in their 40s is that they're all like this, they like this, and they're good at that, and they're bad at that, right? And of course, everybody's offended. And you're like, well, what do you think's happening with digital natives? I don't know why older generations always feel like they've got a right to sort of go, the thing about young people is that they're all this, and this, it's just a strange way of going about things. Okay, we've got lots of lovely maps in there. What I'm going to do is we'll just have a bit of a chat about them, and then I will rush the next bit of the session, which I always do because I get too interested in the maps. So what I'm going to do now is sort of randomly pick a map, and then if it's your map and you're happy to have a chat about it, then you can get on a microphone, or you can just say something in text chat. If you don't want to have a chat about it, it's fine. We'll move on. So let's have a look. Okay, I'm going to go for this one here. So hopefully in Zoom you can see that one large now. Whose map's this? And do you want to chat about it?
That's my map.
Great.
Suresh, yeah.
So I see, so you've got Padlet bottom left there. So you use Padlet, which is why you managed to get your map into Padlet, possibly. Actually, it's not, and you've got a blog there. So would you're quite institutionally resident. Is that because of the way you do your job?
And I guess I use Twitter to connect with people, basically, to connect with other professionals.
Yeah.
And for education as well. I do the same thing with website and Padlet. And email. Email is mostly for work.
Yeah. And then you've got Google and WhatsApp. So Google and WhatsApp is just a massive bunch of everything.
Yeah, I use Google for more or less everything.
Yeah. And you've also got, and also, I'm sure Mark Zuckerberg wouldn't be happy about this, but you've also got Facebook down the visitor end. So you're not social in Facebook so much. Is that right? Or are you just reading stuff but not posting?
Yeah, I deleted the app for a while, and then it's on my phone, but I don't really. I mean, I might open it once in a while, but funnily enough, I've started to browse TikTok videos more recently.
Yeah. But that again, that's a kind of visitor mode, isn't it? It's just consuming stuff, and it's interesting quite often. So having email here, that's what you think of as a non-resident technology in a resident space, but it just goes to show there's no such thing. And the same thing with Facebook, you'd expect that to be used in a resident way, but actually quite a lot of people don't. All right, thank you for that. Let's have a look at another map. Look, I always like a use of color. Whose is this one?
It's mine.
Hello. So this is you've kind of got it so everything's kind of overlapping everything else. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. Well, I have some courses in digital social media and digital tools for preschool and things like that. And a lot of the communication between the community, for instance, teacher putting things they have done with digital tools in their preschools, they put on Facebook or Instagram.
Oh, okay.
So I follow a lot of these accounts and participate in different groups there. This kind of information is. And then also I have used this privately as in my, what I do in my spare time. Also like finding information about this in Facebook group or Instagram groups or things like that. And also a lot of YouTube too.
Yeah. So you haven't tried to sort of manage the difference between personal and professional in that sense. It's just all happening in the same spaces.
Yeah, and that's also a problem. So sometimes when I in the evenings, it's work things they showed up and things.
Yeah.
Oh, should I say this? Should I look at this or not? No, that's a problem. I know.
Yeah, I think it's a really genuinely challenging thing, isn't it? I think we found this over COVID as well. Was we're not. Once you take away the kind of physical geography of work or school, you know, where it wasn't that long ago, you'd have to go to the office to work because that's where the work was on bits of paper, right? But now it's available all the time. I think what we've learned is that we're not actually very good at managing our relationship with work. And a lot of what managed it was the kind of geographical and social structure of having to go somewhere to do any of it. And once that's gone, we all exhaust ourselves. I think that's the same for students to a certain extent.
Yeah. Okay,
let's have a look at another one. So let's go for Ben, because Ben was super quick. Ben.
Hello.
Oh, there's quite a lot on there. And you've got there's all sorts going on here. Now, I'm gonna have to ask you about LinkedIn being institutional and resident. I think partly because of the pandemic, I think I've seen LinkedIn becoming a much more lively space for things to move around. But it seems to me, looking at your map, and then I'll hand it over to you, is you're very controlled, you're very organized about what's institutional and resident, and then everything else is kind of much more fluid.
Okay, so I did a bit of homework to read up your sites, which is why I was able to do this ahead of time, and I was able to post first. But what I really liked about this was I never thought of the way to classify my work life in this form, and also that there's this spectrum that you talked about from visitor to resident. So that was really a new insight to me. But I saw that there was a color coding that I could use to highlight what belongs to institution, that means belongs to the company, and what is within my control, which is all the green stuff you see there. So predominantly in my previous job, the WhatsApp was interesting because it was actually 80% work and 20% social life.
Okay.
Right now it's gone the other way, so I color coded it back to green happily. I do not know what to do with the LinkedIn and for the podcast because I use LinkedIn simply just to get a little pulse on what's happening out there. But when I find connecting on LinkedIn, it's not as close as the ones on the left side, which is people I actually know, versus the LinkedIn people, which is at the professional level. I don't know, looking for jobs or something. So maybe that's just me. And the two fun one, which is the ONL, I put it up there. I get to meet people around the world to understand how they see certain things, and I gain insights. But it's really a credit to the university for allowing me to join here. So I put it as it belongs to an institutional piece. Yeah, I actually had one question for you, Dave, which is the one, what happens when things are closer in the middle? That part I never really understood it well enough.
What happens when they're in the middle?
Yeah, because that this spectrum where things are in the middle, then there is the one on the left and the one on the right. How do I put this? So for example, if I use Reddit, I use it as at a personal level, and then I want to move up to the more personal spectrum. Versus if I were to put it right in the middle, is there something more to the meaning of your matrix?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, the middle's a bit of a sort of get out in some ways. It's just to sort of go, well, it's kind of everything and I can't figure it out, right? Sort of that. One of the other ways you could do it is actually you probably have multiple modes of engagement in the same platforms, right? So actually there might be a little bit of personal Reddit and a little bit of institutional Reddit and a little bit of visitor Reddit. So I actually think, so for example, with me with Twitter, I spend 99% of the time just reading stuff and only like 1% of the time posting things. So I actually think that probably, it's just rough and ready, this process. So the square is broadly the territory that it's covering. But if you went into it in detail, you might want to, then the same platform might appear in multiple places on the map with lines between it. But what I'll do is I'll go on and show you some other people's maps and you can see how people have interpreted it. So I'm going to move on now because otherwise
Great,
I'm going to
thanks.
run out. Yeah. Okay, brilliant. Otherwise I'll run out of time. So how do I do this without switching off Zoom? Hey, we're back. Okay. So we did that. That was the discussion, by the way. So tick. So very quickly, I think some of the things, I'm just going to throw a bunch of ideas at you to reflect on. Somewhere in here, there is a tension or an overlap or an interplay between kind of hierarchical ways of participating and knowing and network ways of knowing. Okay. Whenever something contentious happens at my university, it's quite often in where hierarchical and networked ways of doing things are kind of in tension with each other. So for example, I don't know, open educational practices and assessment, or risk-taking and assessment. It's almost the hierarchical one's almost always assessment. Okay. So in theory terms, and I'm not going to go into the theory, you can sort of map that to constructivism and connectivism, right? And I think within educational institutions, there's this constant kind of tension to be negotiated between these ways of thinking about what learning is and what is authentic and what's of value, right? And that happens all the time. That in the UK, the government's constantly saying that, unless you're learning how to be an engineer, then your degree is worthless. And which is quite a tough thing to hear when you run an arts university, right? So this is a quote from a blog in an earlier run of ONL, and I think it's quite useful. This idea of the people and the network of people in the course being the curriculum. It's quite a sort of sophisticated idea, actually. And I think it's a tough thing for students. I think like postgraduate students could probably understand this, and maybe undergraduate students, but it's quite a tough thing. If you're entering university and you're faced with this idea, it's quite a hard thing to respond to. And we do this to our students all the time in art and design, because they say, what do I need to do to be a brilliant artist? And we go, we're not going to tell you. So, for example, which is the correct answer, right? But it's a tricky thing. Very quick example. This is the first time I ever ran this process with a bunch of librarians, actually, at a conference. And what I realized looking at the maps, and why I thought maybe this is interesting, is that Facebook appeared in lots of different places, which I think is one of the strengths of the process, because it's about motivation to engage you. It would, there was this period of time where we just asked students if they had Facebook, and then go, 80% of our students have Facebook. And you'd go, I don't know what that means. I don't know what they're doing. I don't know how we're supposed to respond to that. It didn't really mean that much. So other maps, this is one of my favorite maps. This came with a note from the PhD student saying, I think social media is just evil and trying to steal all my data. So this is what my world looks like. I've never met anyone who couldn't explain their map, you know, the rationale for the shape of it. Some people have drawn their map and gone, here's why my map is like it is, and I really need to change it. But they understand, they have a rationale. For all I know, this student was absolutely brilliant. You know, the shape of your map and how good you are as a student are two separate things. You got ones like this where someone's sort of got dual profiles in Skype and in Twitter to kind of put a firewall between their personal and their professional life. I'd call that compartmentalization. Most of us suffer from decompartmentalization. It becomes really messy. This one was a very young person who, as far as I could tell, didn't understand the difference between personal and institutional. They were just in the world doing stuff, and it was just in a big lump. They've also written industrial instead of institutional, which I think is very endearing. And then this one's got a sad face by SharePoint. We didn't ask them to do that. That's the first time we saw people kind of annotating with, like, it's one thing to talk about where your thing is on the map. It's quite useful to sort of go, well, how do you actually feel about it? Is this something you enjoy, or is it something that annoys you? So that's an interesting thing that you can do. I'm not going to go through too many of these because we haven't got time. This person had 5 different personas. So they had family, school, a couple of different clubs and societies, their work. So that they had this like kind of stacked thing. It looked exhausting to me. And then some people just like using colors. So, you know, there's that. So very quickly, I'm just going to go through what people have done with it and what I've done with it. So I think fundamentally the value of the process is people do their maps and you look at each other's maps and it starts a conversation. So it's useful. It's a thing you can reflect around, but it also starts a conversation. And I've run plenty of times, I've run the visitor and resident workshop and people have gone, well, hang on a minute, why is that there on your map? How could that possibly be there? And then you have a really interesting discussion about it. If I was running a course with a bunch of undergraduates, I would run the mapping process as one of the first things and then have them all talk to each other and compare maps, because you actually find out quite a lot about each other and about what you think certain technologies, what you think the value of them is to you, if you like. Did a bit of research a couple of years ago where we got about 380 maps from lots of different students across the UK, and I just looked at whether they were like fully filled in every quadrant or partially filled in, and then cross-reference that with this kind of spread of participants. The key thing being, I'm assuming you can see my cursor, but bottom left, it basically shows that the age split between people who had a fully filled in map was absolutely even, and therefore age isn't a factor in terms of what your map looks like necessarily. Now this came out very recently and I can't get to the full text of it because I don't think it's properly published. It's very tantalizing, but this came out just last week, and somebody, this looks like a really big study, has done a massive digital literacy study where they've used digital visitor and residence to implement a 145 open-ended question survey to look at how people are, you know, how digital literacies are operating. So plenty of people have used visitor and residence as a kind of very simple framework to be a framework for research, whether that's the maps or the idea. So it's kind of a usable thing at that level. And then you can go on and add other things to maps. So you can add notes. This person's gone with a consumer creator kind of mode. That's interesting, I think. This person's got direction of travel. I think somebody was mentioning arrows, you know, like actually, I think I'm becoming more resident in this platform. I'm becoming less resident, or it's becoming more professional. I got, oh yeah, anyway, that's a long story, but my mum found me in Twitter, and so I had to change what I was saying. And then you've got, again, perhaps how do the things connect to each other? How does, you know, a bit of work starts here, an idea starts here, and then it moves into this space and across this space. So it's almost the way that our work travels around our map of participation, I think, can be quite interesting. This person's got arrows and notes. So they're really articulating the way that they do things using the map as the kind of starting point. It's actually quite hard to explain how you work online. And I think spatializing it with a map helps. And then this is one of my favorite ones. The pink area there says, ideal self, not real, but would like to be. So this is like an aspirational map. This is a PhD student who wanted to become like a digital scholar and be all over the web doing that kind of stuff. So she wanted to be very active in that kind of very residential institutional space, which is nice because that's her own determination, right? So I think one of the key things you can do is you draw a map, whether it's with students or with colleagues, and then you can go, do you feel like you've got agency? Do you feel like you're the one that's in control of the way that you're operating online? Or, just referring to the person earlier, you're just watching TikTok videos for hours and then feeling a bit annoyed about it. Do you know what I mean? Or whatever it might be, right? No specific critique of TikTok. So that's what you can do with the maps. I've got a couple of what I'm going to do, and this is a very, how to be in control. I think a lot of it's got to do with self-determination and personal agency. I think that's very important. And if you've read the Zuboff stuff on the age of surveillance capitalism, then it's sort of, it's saying, yes, that's the dangerous part of the digital environment, is that it kind of co-opts our personal agency. And we want our students to have a lot of personal agency, right? That's kind of the point of what we're doing. Most people are in education because they want their students to develop that personal agency. Just for a couple of minutes and far too fast, I'm going to throw some ideas at you and then I'm going to stop. But I'm doing it because it's the first session of ONL, and it might be things that you want to think about throughout the rest of the course. It might not. I mean, this is being recorded. So picking up, I didn't realize it at the time, but over COVID, the worst bits of COVID, because it's still around, I got really interested in the idea of presence, because I realized that all of our curriculum was based around the concept of contact hours, and that didn't make any sense online, really. And then later I realized that the concept of presence is, of course, inherent in the idea of being resident. So it's all part of the same thing. And I haven't had a new idea for years, you could argue, but this was an interesting way of expressing it, okay? I think this is a really interesting way of designing learning, is that you start with the idea of presence and different modes of presence and how you facilitate different modes of presence across a cohort, and then work from there. Yeah, how to foster agency. And these are just some different modes of presence that you can mix and match, but it's good to be conscious about how you're trying to facilitate presence, as opposed to how you're trying to get X amount of knowledge into somebody's head. Depends on the subject area, depends on the curriculum, depends on the nature of the assessment. But anyway, and then lastly, just for a minute, this is where I've got to so far on where we are post-pandemic. I think there's something going on where there's a tension between our cultural conception of education and what it means to say do university, and the conception of education as a learning process. And COVID kind of shook that all up and threw it back down, and we still haven't managed to pick that apart. But a lot of the tensions in my university and amongst the student body and at a societal level about education are around cultural conceptions of authenticity, i.e. I go to a room and listen to a lecture, that's the most basic one, and in tension with what is the most effective way to learn things. These are not the same thing now the digital environment is with us, but I think actually it gets really mixed up. I'm going to stop there. Thank you for listening, and thank you for doing the maps. Sorry the Padlet was a bit bumpy, but that's the reality. Sometimes that happens and then you figure out a way of getting around it. If you finished your map or just now, or you want to adjust it, then do keep putting them into the Padlet. Yeah, I think, Christoph, that's a good point, and I haven't got time to reflect on it, but yes.
Yeah,
okay.
but
That's it.
talking about,
sorry, George.
go ahead.
I was just going to say this is my I'd forgotten. This I really like this quote from George. I think if you're going to take anything away, it's this. It's fantastic, and it kind of is the bookend to the first quote. So if we've connected everything to everything else, then the role of the teacher or the educator should be the arbiter of connections, not the arbiter of information. Anyway, I will actually stop now because I'm over time.
Just 1 minute. Thank you so much. And talking about presence and interaction and testing new stuff, maybe. And just a heads up for next week, if you want to engage with Dave and test a new thing, maybe is the tweet chat on Tuesday. I put it in the chat. You find it on the homepage, of course. Hopefully we see a lot of you there, and thanks Dave for joining us then, and yeah, thanks for today everyone, and hopefully you have great conversations in your PBL groups and use this as an input. And
yeah, it'll be Donald Trump and Elon Musk will be there next week, is that right?
Yeah, we invite everyone, and if they have something to say and contribute, they definitely are online participating, and maybe we have a little bit different questions which they are interested in, but well.
All right, cheers everyone.
Thanks so much for today.
Cheers,
see you.
Bye.